There are places where faith manifests itself openly and vibrantly, with bells announcing the time of day and doors always open to welcome those seeking God. But Blida is not one of those places. Blida is a city suffocated by heat and silence in northern Algeria, where the air mixes the scent of spices with a silent fear. Every street, every corner, is filled with suspicious glances. Speaking about Jesus in public is not an act of courage here. It is something so dangerous that it cannot even be said aloud yet. That's why our community lives in the shadows, in the cracks where danger seems least. We meet weekly in borrowed houses, windows covered with thick sheets, cell phones turned off and stored in metal boxes. Our prayers are whispered, our hymns are sung almost silently, and we study the word like someone reading letters from a forbidden land. My name is Rashid, and I'm the leader of a small Christian group hidden in the city that loves God but can't call him by the name. I'm 32 years old, but there are nights when I feel like I'm carrying the weight of a lifetime. Constant fear has left its mark on my face and hands. Whenever I open the door of a new house for worship, my body trembles. I never know if I'll find brothers or law enforcement officers ready to arrest us. Living like this becomes a second skin. You learn to look over your shoulder, to remain silent without appearing afraid, to memorize escape routes. And you learn that God's love doesn't always arrive as a welcoming embrace. Often, it's a silent fire that burns within, while you pretend to be invisible on the outside. In 2019, we met at the home of a widow named Fatima. She was about 50 years old and had lost her husband in an accident years before. She converted secretly after a foreign missionary, about to be deported, left her a Bible hidden inside a cookbook. Every night, by candlelight, she read those pages as if they were a treasure, until the day she decided she could no longer hide her. Fatima offered us her small, cracked plaster room, but with one clear condition. If they come after you, I'll take the blame. Just don't stop coming. There were 15 of us, most of us young people between 18 and 30 years. Some were born into Christian families who had hidden for decades. Others, like me, found Christ in the depths of despair. I remember the night I gave my life to Jesus. I was 23 years old and going through a very difficult time. I had just lost my job for the 4th time, and my father kicked me out of the house because I had refused an arranged marriage, something he saw as dishonorable. I was sleeping on the roof of an abandoned building when an older man, a Christian, found me shivering from the cold. He welcomed me, offered me hot tea, and spoke of a God who demands love, not merit. I cried for hours, not out of sadness, but because, for the first time, someone was offering me unconditional love. But this love, so real, also had visible consequences. My younger brother, Karim, was arrested twice for distributing Arabic Bibles. The second time, he was so severely beaten that he lost the hearing in his left ear. My mother stopped speaking to me after I was baptized one cold morning in a river outside the city, with only 3 witnesses. Among us, Jusuf, a young man with the eyes of a poet, was fired from the bakery where he worked after his boss found a Bible verse hidden in his backpack. Amira, a 19-year-old girl with a mesmerizing voice, was rejected by her own family and forced to move into a tiny room where rats scratched the walls But even in the midst of all this, we remain steadfast, because we know that, even in silence and fear, God's love sustains us and calls us to continue with courage, even in hiding, because the faith we carry is greater than any threat. But through it all, we had each other, and those sacred moments in Fatima's small room. Each meeting followed an almost secret ritual. We arrived one by one, 5 minutes apart, as if we were simply paying a courtesy call on the widow. Inside, we removed our shoes to keep quiet, sitting on worn cushions and rugs that reeked of time and Fatima prepared her mint tea, and the steam rose slowly, mingling with our whispered prayers. We studied the scriptures with the desperate hunger of shipwrecked people, because we knew each word could be the last we would hear together. On a muggy Tuesday afternoon in July, if memory serves, the heat was almost unbearable. Air conditioning? An impossible luxury, one we couldn't turn on without attracting attention. So we fanned ourselves with old notebooks as we read Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Jusuf, in his wry way, commented quietly, "Then we are doubly blessed." We laughed. It was our form of resistance, finding small sparks of joy even in the midst of oppression. But suddenly, everything changed. A loud knock on the door. It wasn't the soft, agreed-upon knock we used to use among ourselves. There were 3 knocks, a pause, 2 knocks, like an impatient, violent punch that doesn't wait for an answer because it knows it's going in anyway. Silence fell over the room like a concrete slab. Nervous glances were exchanged. Amira clutched the Bible to her chest as if it were a shield. Karim, my brother, stood slowly, but I motioned for him to stay still. As leader, the responsibility to open the door was mine. With trembling legs, I walked to the door. Each step felt like thunder in my ears. I took a deep breath and whispered a prayer I no longer fully remember. Only the end, thy will be done. I opened the door. 3 young men stormed in. The first was tall, with a full beard and a striking scar on his left eyebrow. He wore a spotless white djellaba, but his eyes shone with the dark hatred of those who love to fight. The second was shorter, stocky, with the strong arms of someone who had always worked hard. He wore a green cap and a crooked smile, showing off a gold tooth. The third, the youngest, perhaps 18, was thin as a reed, with a nervous look in his eyes, but determined to prove something. They were known to everyone in the neighborhood. They were part of a radical group that patrolled the streets, searching for any deviation from the true faith. They had stoned the home of a family selling alcohol, burned down a Christian tailor's shop, and threatened a teacher who refused to wear the full veil. And now, they were here. So this is the traitor's den. The Scar's husky voice cut through the air, each word trailing like poison. His breath mingled tobacco and Did they think we didn't know? I said nothing, just spread my arms in a gesture of peace, my heart pounding like a wild horse. The burly man with the gold tooth advanced to the table where the pamphlets lay, materials a brother had clandestinely printed in a distant printing shop 2 hours away. They were the Gospels of John, in Arabic, a treatise on the love of Christ, sheets of illustrated verses for children. So you want to change the people's religion? The burly man shouted, clutching the stack of papers tightly. Do you think you'll steal souls with this? The thin young man let out a high-pitched, uncomfortable laugh, the kind of laugh of someone seeking approval and not knowing what to say. And then it happened. The man tossed the pamphlets to the floor with disdain. The scarred man pulled a lighter from his pocket. A metallic click sounded, and a small, almost insignificant flame appeared. But when the fire touched the first paper, it spread quickly, voraciously, like hunger. The pages twisted, the letters disappearing in the orange glow. The strong smell of ink and burning paper filled the room. Black ash began to float, light, almost obscene. The 3 of them laughed. They laughed as they stomped on the flames to open them. They laughed and enjoyed themselves, while we, paralyzed, could only watch. Amira began to cry silently, clenching her fists until her knuckles turned white. Karim looked at me, searching for some sign, some permission to act. I shook my head, knowing that any move could turn everything into tragedy. This is what your lies deserve, spat the scarred man, kicking the ashes in our direction. Then he looked me in the eye, firm and menacing. If this news reaches you here, it won't just be paper that. They left furiously, but not before throwing rocks at the windows. The glass didn't shatter, but the sound echoed like a cruel warning. We stood there, motionless, breathing in the smoke still floating in the air. No one spoke, only the crackling of the last embers filled the silence. Then, 3 minutes later, we heard something that would shake our understanding for years. An explosion. A white flash, incredibly bright, illuminated the window covered by sheets. A deep metallic rumble shook the walls of the house and made our hearts stop for a moment. The power went out throughout the entire block, and outside, on the street, chaos began. The first scream was high-pitched, feminine, filled with pure panic. Then came other voices. Men, women, confused orders, doors being flung open. The entire neighborhood seemed to wake up to something I couldn't understand. Inside Fatima's house, we stood frozen in an almost supernatural silence. The smoke from the burning pamphlets rose, slowly winding toward the ceiling, but now it seemed like a minor detail compared to what was happening outside. Amira held her hands over her mouth, trying to control her tears. Just stood, his eyes fixed on the covered window, as if he could see through the fabric. Karim touched my shoulder and whispered, almost voiceless, "Rashid, what was that?" I had no answer, just a heavy feeling I didn't dare name. Fatima was the first to move. She stood up with difficulty. Her arthritic knees always gave her trouble, and walked to the door with a determination that belied her fragility. "I need to see," he murmured. And so, she walked out onto the street, where the horrible truth was already beginning to reveal itself, just a few meters from her home. I followed them silently. Some young people tried to get up, but I signaled for them to wait. I knew it wasn't safe for us all to leave at once. We opened the door carefully, and the street was filled with an eerie darkness. The lights had gone out with the power outage, and only the bluish light of dusk cast diffuse shadows. The air smelled strange, metallic and ozonated, that electric odor that lingers after a heavy thunderstorm. Despite this, something didn't feel right. It was raining, but the sky was clear, almost ironically. I took a few steps toward where the young men who had burned our material had fled. That's when I saw them. In the middle of the street, beneath the transformer hanging from the pole, 3 bodies lay motionless. My stomach tightened, my legs nearly gave out, but I forced myself to keep going. Each step echoed like a funeral drum in that heavy silence. Other neighbors were already approaching. An elderly man with a cane, a woman clutching her child, a group of teenagers illuminating the scene with their cell phone flashlights. As I approached, the strong smell hit me. Burning fabric, melted rubber, something chemical and acrid that made me cough. The three young men were face down, eyes closed. Their clothes, the white jalaba, the green shirt, the youngest's t-shirt, were blackened, charred at the... One of the shoes was still smoking, the sole nearly melted. The boy with the scar had a dark burn on his forearm, like an involuntary mark. The more robust boy, with a gold tooth, was breathing irregularly, his mouth half open, a trickle of saliva dripping. But what disturbed me most was the absence of serious injury. No blood, no broken bones, just superficial marks, as if something had scratched furiously but unwillingly to destroy them completely. "Someone call an ambulance!" a woman shouted from the window. Many tried to use their cell phones, but the signal was weak. The power outage also affected the antennas. An elderly man in a white turban and dyed beard approached with a powerful flashlight and shone it on the transformer. The damage was visible. Twisted wires, burned metal, a hole in the casing. "The shock came from here," he said, his voice trembling. "But it doesn't make sense. Transformers are protected. They shouldn't explode like that." A young engineer, a neighbor, squatted down and checked the pulses of all three. First the one with the scar, then the robust one, and finally, the thinner one. "They're alive," he said, surprised. "Unconscious, but alive." He didn't finish his sentence, and no one wanted to hear what was to come. Something inside me screamed a truth that my mind tried to silence. They were the same three young men who had been at Fatima's house minutes before, the same ones who laughed as they burned our pamphlets, the same ones who threatened to destroy more than just paper. At that moment, I felt God's presence, protecting those who seemed lost, acting in a way I didn't yet understand. I could only trust. At that moment, I and everyone there were overcome by an unexpected shock, like an invisible electric shock that pierced our souls. An elderly man with a turban on his head noticed my expression and asked me quietly, "Do you know them?" I remained silent, hesitate. Telling the truth could put us in danger, but hiding it would also be an escape. I took a deep breath and replied, "They're from the neighborhood. I saw them pass by a little while ago." He studied me with a piercing gaze, then turned his attention to Fatima's house, which was about 20 meters away. "You were there when it all happened, weren't you?" There was no judgment in his voice, just genuine curiosity. "Yes," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Did you notice anything strange before this?" My heart raced. Yes, something strange. These guys seemed to be heading somewhere, but suddenly they made a vague gesture, almost as if they were waiting for something next to the transformer. I said nothing. I was afraid it would seem crazy, or even worse. 14 minutes later, the ambulance arrived, piercing the silence of the night with its sirens. Two paramedics rushed out, carrying folding stretchers and equipment. They carefully examined the injured, administered oxygen, and immobilized their necks as a precaution. One of them, a man in his 40s with deep circles under his eyes, murmured to his colleague something that stuck with me. "I've never seen burns like that. It looks like the electricity chose exactly where to strike." One by one, they loaded the boys into the ambulance. The stronger man began to groan, a deep, chilling sound. The scarred man was still unconscious, pale in the flashlight beam. The thin young man opened his eyes for a moment, stared at the dark sky with a look of pure terror, and closed his eyes again. As the ambulance pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, but the voices didn't stop. Small groups formed, arguing in whispers. "It was just an electrical problem," said one group. "It was nothing more than that," countered another. It was then that an elderly woman wearing a black veil raised her voice piercing through the air. "This is punishment. These boys are up to mischief in the neighborhood, and God has his ways of correcting them." Someone tried to silence her. "Don't be silly. It was an accident." But she shook her head, convinced. Accidents don't choose their victim. This was necessary. I returned to Fatima's house with a weight on my chest, as if I were walking in slow motion through water. When I entered, everyone stared at me, waiting for answers. Karim was the first to speak. I simply said in a firm voice, "They're alive." I closed the door, trying to hold back the lump in my throat. They were burned, unconscious, but alive. The silence that followed seemed filled with unspoken questions. Just finally broke the silence. "Rashid, do you think?" He didn't finish, but everyone understood the question. I sat down on a cushion, my hands shaking, and Fatima handed me a glass of water. I drank quickly, trying to find my courage. I looked at the 15 young people around me, scared, confused faces, but with a dangerous hope in their... I don't know. I don't know if it was divine intervention, coincidence, or something I still don't understand. What I do know is that those three came to attack us. They burned the word of God and laughed about it. They threatened us with violence. And a few minutes later, something happened, something that shouldn't have happened, and knocked them to the ground. Amira spoke, her voice trembling, almost in prayer. In the book of Acts, when Ananias and Sapphira lied to the Holy Spirit, they fell immediately. At that moment, we all felt that at that moment, something much greater than us was acting. I shook my head, trying to find the words, but all I could manage was, I don't know. There's one thing I know, they're still alive. If God had wanted to, would have done it without hesitation. Maybe it was a sign, a warning or maybe I just swallowed hard at the mystery. Maybe it was mercy disguised as. Karim broke the silence. What if they come after us? The police will investigate. They'll want to know what those. Fatima, who hadn't spoken until, finally broke the silence. Her voice was calm but firm. If they come, let them come. I'll tell the truth. I'll tell them that those young men broke into my house, burned my things, and simply left. What happened out there has nothing to do with me. Or you. That woman, with her weak knees and weather-beaten hands, had more courage than all of us combined. I admired her, and we then decided to pray. Holding hands, we formed a tight circle, drawing strength from one another. Joseph began the prayer. Father, we don't understand what happened, but we trust that you know everything. Protect those 3 young people, heal their wounds, and, if it is your will, touch their hearts. By the time we finished, it was already past 10 o'clock. One by one, we said our goodbyes, as usual, but there was something different in the air. A mixture of fear and awe that no one could explain. I was the last to leave. Before I left, Fatima called out to me, her voice gentle but firm. Rashid, what happened today was neither coincidence nor pure cruelty. God does not act to destroy, but to awaken. I stepped out into the cold night, under a starry sky that seemed to mock our pain, shining indifferently to the chaos we were living in. I walked to my room, thinking about the 3 bodies, the ashes floating in the air, about that strange and inexplicable moment. Deep in my soul, a voice whispered, a mixture of fear and comfort. You have just witnessed something that will change everything. I couldn't sleep. Lying on the thin mattress in my rented room, staring at the cracked and stained ceiling, the images wouldn't leave. The 3 bodies on the floor, motionless, like puppets whose strings had been cut. And that sound, a deep, metallic rumble that made the walls vibrate, but also something inside my chest. At 4 in the morning, I got up. Dawn was still a long way off, but I couldn't bear the silence. I knelt by the window and whispered a prayer, even though I didn't quite know what to ask for. Forgiveness, protection, understanding. The words came out disjointed, like puzzle pieces that didn't fit together. At 7, Karim knocked on my door, bringing fresh bread and tea in a thermos. His eyes had the same dark circles as mine. You couldn't sleep either? He said, without waiting for an answer. We sat on the porch, watching life return to the street. Blida was slowly waking up, vendors pulling their carts, women with bags, children running to school. Everything seemed normal, but for us, nothing would ever be the same. Karim broke the silence again. I went to the hospital at 6 in the morning. I needed to know. The 3 of them are in the ICU. The doctor who treated me was clear. It's a miracle they're still alive. The burns? Strange. In some places, superficial. In others, deep, as if electricity had coursed through their bodies, choosing exactly where to enter and exit. I asked if he'd spoken to any of their family members. They told me there was no security outside their room, and that the police were already involved. Amira looked at me with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Rashid, they're going to come after us. It's only a matter of time, isn't it? The firmness in her voice surprised me. Herod didn't have a chance to repent. These 3, they're still alive. One of them even had a vision in the hospital. If God only wanted to punish, he wouldn't have let them breathe. Samir, nervously adjusting his glasses, joined the conversation. There's also the story of the U.S. A man touched the Ark of the Covenant to try to hold it, and God instantly knocked him down. Good intentions, but fatal consequence. Sometimes God's holiness isn't negotiable. Exactly, agreed another young man. Nabil, a quiet boy who rarely spoke, finally joined the group. What if what happened wasn't punishment or mercy? What if it was a revelation? Like when the disciples saw the transfiguration. It wasn't for them, but so they could know who Jesus really was. The conversation spiraled into an intense mix of improvised theology and lived experience. Each person tried to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have pieces from different boxes, fragments of meaning and mystery. I'm scared, Amira admitted suddenly. I'm scared this is because if it is real, it means God is so close he can touch us, or consume us. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. Confession touched us all. It's one thing to believe in a distant God, in an ancient story, but it's another to accept a God who intervenes on our street, in our city, in our time, a God who demands more, who cannot be tamed. Karim spoke, his voice hoarse and thick. When I was imprisoned the 2nd time, a guard asked me why I still believed if my God hadn't rescued me. I replied that rescue isn't always physical, sometimes it's internal. But now I don't know what to say. God intervened physically, and I don't know if that gives me more faith or more fear. Maybe both are true. I remembered the disciples in the boat when Jesus walked on water. They felt fear and adoration at the same time. Peter wanted to walk to Jesus, but he nearly drowned. True faith isn't the absence of fear. It's continuing to walk despite it. Joseph nodded thoughtfully. So the question isn't whether it was God, but what do we do now, knowing he could do it? There lay the heart of our crisis. If we said it was just a coincidence, we could continue living a lukewarm, comfortable, risk-free faith. But if we accepted it was divine intervention, we would have to live differently, with more courage, more commitment, ready for the impossible. I believe it was God, Amira said, wiping away the tears that were still streaming down her face, her voice full of conviction. And I believe it was mercy. Because those 3 young people experienced an encounter no sermon could have provoked. Now, they have a story that cannot be ignored, and so do we. Samir, ever cautious, asked, "What if we're wrong? What if this is just an electrical accident and we're making too much of it?" I replied without hesitation, "Is there a worse way to go wrong than to live as if God were real and powerful?" We fell silent. We let the words fall between us, heavy, full of meaning. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. The wind creaked the loose floorboards of the abandoned cafe. The moon continued on its way, indifferent to everything. It was then that we decided on something new, something radical, to pray for the 3 young men, not just from afar, not just in our thoughts, but with true intention, to ask God to finish what he had started that afternoon, to heal their bodies and awaken their souls. We held hands in a circle. Joseph began the prayer, then Amira, and then each of us spoke, one by one. The words weren't rehearsed, nor were they perfect, just broken whispers, awkward pleas, confessions that we didn't understand anything but trusted someone. By the time we finished, it was midnight. We each left Uno in our own separate directions, with a new weight on our hearts. I returned home with a new certainty. What began with the burning of the leaflets wasn't over. It was just the beginning of something we still couldn't understand. And somewhere in the city, 3 young people dreamed of lights they couldn't turn off. There are times when faith and fear live side by side in the same space. If you're going through a moment like this, I want you to know, there's a community here that understands. 3 days passed and they felt like 3 years. Each hour stretched out like someone waiting for a storm that had been announced. The one you know is coming, but no one knows when. The police didn't come back after me. This absence was worse than their presence, because it meant they were watching, piecing things together, building a bigger case. The neighborhood was abuzz with conflicting rumors. Some said the 3 had awakened and vowed revenge. Others said they were still in a deep coma. A more exaggerated story said that one of them had completely lost his memory, with no recollection of what happened. The truth, as always, was buried under layers of fear and speculation. I kept to myself. I only went out to buy bread and water. My landlord, a gray mustachioed man who had always been kind, now eyed me with veiled suspicion. He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, I was sitting on the floor of my room, reading the book of Job quietly. I always turned to Job when life seemed to have no meaning. A man who loses everything without explanation, who screams for answers and only finds more questions. And, in the midst of all this pain, he finds a strange comfort. It was then that I heard the knocking on the door. It wasn't loud, nor was it commanding, like the police. It was soft, almost timid, as if whoever was on the other side wasn't sure if they should be there. Getting up slowly, my heart racing, I walked over to open it. I walked to the door, put my hand on the handle and stopped. For a moment, I stood still, trying to understand why my heart was beating so fast. "Who is it?" I asked. Silence. Then, a weak, trembling voice, almost a whisper. "It's me, Nassim." For a second the name didn't make sense. Then, like a flash, the memory came back to him. Nassim, the youngest of the 3, the thin one, the one with the restless eyes. The same one who, in the ambulance, had opened his eyes for a moment with that look of pure terror. My hands began to sweat. I turned the handle and opened the door. There he was. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in just 3 days. His arms were covered in ointment-stained bandages. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, with dark circles so dark they looked like bruises. He wore an oversized white shirt, probably borrowed from someone. But what caught my attention most were the eyes. Those eyes that had once held a glint of defiance were now empty. It wasn't ordinary fear, it was brokenness. We stood there, motionless. 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. He with his hands hanging at his sides. I still holding the door ajar. He began, but his voice faltered. He swallowed and tried again. "I need to talk to you. I know I don't have the right. I know you might hate me." The words came out in a rush, and tears began to well in his eyes. But I don't know who else to talk to. Inside, something stirred. It was something deeper, a mixture of caution, amazement, perhaps mercy. He opened the door at once. "Come in." He entered slowly, as if the ground were unstable. He looked around. The mattress on the floor, the open Bible, the half-empty glass of water, the bare walls with a small wooden cross I had carved myself. "Sit there," I pointed to the only pillow. He slumped, almost collapsing. It felt like his body was barely supporting him. I sat down on the mattress, leaving space between us. "How did you find me?" I asked around. He replied simply, "Everyone knows who you are." That sentence bothered me, but I left it for later. "And how are you?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Superficial. That's what the doctor said. Second-degree burns, a few blisters, nothing that'll leave a mark." He paused and added, his voice breaking, "At least not on the outside." "And why did you come here, Nassim?" I asked. He looked up, and what I saw in his eyes chilled me. It wasn't shame, it was something bigger, fear. Because that night, in the hospital, I saw something. I waited in silence. Nassim took a deep breath, her hands trembling at ease. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. Everything hurt. There were white lights above me. I thought I was in the emergency room. He paused, searching for words. But the lights started changing. They got brighter, more vivid, and then I heard a voice. "What kind of voice?" I asked, my heart racing. He stared at me. It wasn't human. It was deep, coming from everywhere at once. The tears began to fall, and she said, "Don't play with what is sacred. I'm giving you a chance you didn't deserve." When Nassim repeated those words, the air between us grew heavy. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. He took a deep breath, his voice breaking. "I screamed," he said, looking at the floor. "I screamed so loud the nurses came. They sedated me, and when I woke up, it was morning. My mother was beside me, crying." He brought his hands to his face, trying to hold back the tears. "But the voice didn't go away. It's still here." He pointed to his head. "Every time I close my eyes." "What did the doctor say?" I asked. "That it was electric shock trauma. They said the brain can create auditory hallucinations after something so intense." He lowered his hands and looked at me, his eyes burning with conviction. "But I know it wasn't a hallucination. It was real as you standing here in front of me." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "And the others? Kamal and Farid?" His face fell. "Kamal, the one with the scar, is still in the hospital. His burns have worsened. He won't talk to anyone. Farid," he paused bitterly, "left yesterday. I went to visit him, but he kicked me out. He said it was all my fault, that if I'd had the courage to finish the job, none of this would have happened." "Work?" I asked. Nassim nodded, shame etched on his face. "We weren't just going to burn the pamphlets. We were going to burn down the whole house." His voice trembled. "I thought I was doing the right thing, that I was cleaning up the neighborhood, removing what they called impurity. I thought you deserved to die." I felt the air leave my lungs. For the first time, I realized how close we were to a much greater tragedy. But then came the shock. It was as if something had come between us and the evil we were about to do. As if the universe itself said, "Enough." Nassim's eyes were teary as he looked up. "Rashid, I grew up believing you were enemies of God. I was taught that Christians were infidels, traitors, deserving of punishment. But that night," he paused, struggling to continue. "That night I realized that perhaps I was speechless. No theological explanation seemed sufficient in the face of someone so broken. After a few seconds, I managed to ask, 'What do you want from me, Nassim?' He swallowed hard. "I want to understand." He closed his eyes and let the tears fall. "To understand why God, if it was God, spared our lives. To understand what you have that we don't. To understand if there's still a chance for forgiveness for me, after what I tried to do." I felt something tear inside my chest, because I knew exactly what it was. I've been there. The place where the guilt is so great you see no way out, and all that's left is to surrender. It's there that God finds us. Not because we seek him, but because we can no longer run away. I slowly got up and walked over to him. Nassim looked at me, confused as I knelt before him. "Nassim," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "Forgiveness isn't something we earn, it's something we receive. And yes, there is forgiveness for you. Not because you deserve it, none of us do, but because God's mercy is greater than any sin we've ever committed." Tears streamed down his face, wetting his crumpled shirt. He sobbed. "I don't understand. I wanted to burn you alive. How can you talk to me like—" I smiled tenderly and replied, "Because I didn't deserve it either. Years ago, someone showed me grace when I was the last one who deserved it. And that's what changed everything." I looked at him and said, my voice still cracking, "I was looking for you, Nassim, and I believe, with every fiber of my being, that what happened that night wasn't just to stop you, it was to wake you up." We sat there, on the floor of that simple room, as the orange light of late afternoon painted the walls. Nassim cried for long minutes, maybe hours, and I cried with her. But it wasn't fear, nor pain. It was something deeper, awe before the impossible. I was seeing, with my own eyes, the transformation that only God can accomplish. When he could breathe again, I asked, "Are you afraid of what all this means?" He nodded, his voice trembling. "I do. My family would reject me. My friends would call me a traitor. I would lose everything." "I know," I replied calmly. "I lost everything too. But what I found afterward is worth more than anything I left behind." Nassim wiped his face with his sleeve. "Can I come to one of your meetings, just to listen? I'm not ready to decide anything, but I need to understand." I was silent. I thought about the risks, the group's reaction, the fear this might cause. But I also thought about mercy and how it can't stop halfway. "Yes, you can," he said. "You're welcome." He stayed with me a while longer. I told my own story, how I found faith, what it cost, and why I never turned back. He listened attentively, asking questions that revealed a restless but open heart. When he finally left, night had fallen. I stood at the door, watching him walk away down the street. His step was still hesitant, but there was a lightness to it. I closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. I knew something had changed. The enemy had knocked on my door, and instead of destruction, it had brought surrender. Have you ever witnessed someone truly change? Not a change of words, but of soul? If so, tell me. These stories need to be told. Gathering the group to tell them about Nassim was one of the hardest decisions of my life. I knew reactions would be mixed. Some would see his visit as a sign that God was moving something much bigger than we could understand. Others would see the opposite, a risk, a trap, perhaps the beginning of persecution. I decided I wouldn't do it over text. I needed to look them in the eye and let them know I was telling the truth. I went to Fatima's house first. She welcomed me as always, with mint tea and homemade cookies, but I could see the concern in her. "You have a look on your face that brings news," he said, as he poured the tea into the small glass cups. I told him everything. The knock on the door, the bandages on his arms, the tears, the voice he heard in the hospital, the request to be with him. Fatima listened without interrupting, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on me, hanging on every word. When I finished, she was silent for a long minute. Then she sighed deeply. "You know this is going to cause problems." I nodded. "I know. Some will be scared. Others." Amira still dreams about that night. Fatima rubbed her eyes slowly, and then looked at me with a sweetness that only she had. "But if God is calling this young man, who are we to close the door?" Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Paul persecuted Christians. Mercy does not follow human logic. A weight lifted from my chest. "So, you think I should bring him?" She smiled slightly. "I think you should tell the group everything and let them decide together. Sometimes the body needs to discern what the soul has already perceived." "This can't be your decision alone, Rashid," Fatima said with that calm that always hid firmness. "We are one body, and bodies only heal when all parts participate." She was right, as she almost always was. That same night, we called an emergency meet. The venue was the home of Ibrahim, one of the brothers who lived a little way off, near Olivet, a discreet place, protected from prying eyes. We arrived gradually, as was customary. By the time the last one entered and the door was locked, the air inside the room was already thick with anticipation and fear. I waited for everyone to settle in and took a deep breath. 3 days ago, I began. One of the guys who burned our flyers showed up at my door. Silence fell like a stone. Amira let out a small moan. Karim stiffened, just leaned forward, his eyes wide. "His name is Nassim," I continued, "the youngest of the 3. He said he had a vision in the hospital. He heard a voice telling him not to trifle with what is sacred, and that he was being given a chance he didn't deserve." "And you believe that?" Samir interrupted, disbelief evident on his face. "Just like that, right away?" "No," I replied. "It was hard. But I looked into his eyes. I saw the remorse. I heard the confession. He told me they were going to burn down the whole house, with us inside." A murmur of horror ran through the... Amira covered her mouth with both hands. Karim closed his eyes, as if trying to erase the image. "But God stopped them," I continued firmly. "And now Nassim wants to understand why. He said he wants to come to one of our meetings, just to listen." The reactions came all at once. "No way!" shouted Nabil, the quiet boy who almost never spoke, now standing, his face red. "This is suicide. What if it's fake? What if he's trying to infiltrate us to report us?" "Nabil's right," another brother said, his voice tense. "It's very suspicious. Then the one who had the vision comes looking for you? That sounds more like a plan than a regret." Karim, on the other hand, spoke in a different tone. "Or maybe it's just the kind of thing God does, turning enemies into brothers, like he did with Saul of Tarsus." Nabil immediately retorted, "Saulo had witnesses. He had confirmation. This guy just has a pretty story." "But half of what we believe also depends on faith," Joseph said. "We believe that Jesus rose from the dead based on the testimony of others. Why would this be any different?" Amira stood slowly. Her voice was shaking, but the words cut through the air. because Jesus didn't try to burn us alive 3 days ago. The silence that followed was heavy. Her pain was undeniable. I had no ready answer. I understand, he said softly. I'm not asking you to accept him or to be present if he comes. If you don't want to, we'll understand. But I also can't lock the door if God is opening. Fatima, who had remained silent until then, sat up straight in her chair and spoke with the quiet wisdom that always made the group listen to her. I propose the following. Rashid meets with the boy again, but in a public place. And he won't go alone. 1 or 2 of you accompany. Observe, ask questions, see if what he says is true. Then we can decide together if he can come to a meeting. The suggestion hung in the air. It didn't completely please anyone, but it wasn't rejected either. It was a middle ground, a safe path between fear and faith. And perhaps that was what God was asking of us at that moment. Courage, but with discernment. The room was heavy as the vote began. The final tally came slowly, as if each vote carried weight. 8 in favor of Fatima's plan, 4 against, 3 abstained. Among those who didn't vote was Amir. Her voice breaking, she simply said, I can't decide now. I need to pray. We decided that Karim would come with me to meet Nassim. We met at a small cafe in the central market, a busy place, where it would be difficult for someone to sneak up on us, but where we could speak privately, amid the clinking of cups and the hubbub. But before we could finalize the detail, the world struck again. 2 days later, the police arrived at Karim's house early in the morning. They arrested him on charges of inciting religious violence and conspiracy to disturb public order. Public order. Those words sounded like a sentence. The evidence? Anonymous testimony. Neighbors who claimed to have seen him distributing Christian materials on the street. Something Karim had. When I found out, I felt the ground disappear from my feet. Karim wasn't just my blood brother. He was my brother in faith, my partner in struggle from the beginning. I ran to the police station, but they wouldn't let me see him. The officer at the counter, a middle-aged man with bruises on his face, spoke with bureaucratic detachment. Visitors are not permitted until the initial investigation is completed. It could take days, weeks. I asked what investigation, what evidence they had. He replied that it was confidential. Hire a lawyer and stop what you're doing, he advised, as if telling someone they were in trouble by choice. I left with shaking, helpless, and angry. It wasn't just the arrest. It was the message. They were pressuring us. Someone, police, families of the injured, radical groups, decided we were a problem to be contained. That night, they gathered the 11 who were still willing to stay. Others had decided to stay, out of fear. I didn't blame them. We have 2 options, I said as we sat in a circle. Either we disperse and wait for the storm to pass, or we continue, but with more caution. And Karim? Yusuf asked, his voice tense. We will never abandon him, I replied vehemently. We will get a lawyer. We will call human rights organizations. We will make a public outcry if necessary. We will not let them arrest our brother and let it paralyze us. They want to silence us. We will not help them. Fatima added calmly but firmly. Karim wouldn't want us to give up. He'd rather we were on the move, serving and caring for each other. We voted again. This time the decision was unanimous. We would continue, changing locations every week, reducing communications trails, and prioritizing urgent legal help but there was one question no one dared to say out loud, and it hung between us like smoke. And what will we do with Nassim? I asked, because it was the question that was burning inside me. If I brought Nassim in now, with Karim in jail, how would they react? Juice responded first, with suspicion that almost sounded paranoid. They'll think he has something to do with the arrest, that he's part of a scheme. What if it hadn't? What if that was precisely the enemy's plan, What if fear makes us reject someone God is reaching? No one had a ready answer. There was only the weight of choice. Protect the group, or make room for the mercy that had transformed us from the beginning. We stood there, each of us holding a part of that weight, knowing that any path would have a cost. That night, as I walked back to my room under a starless sky, I felt the crushing weight of the crossroads we stood at. On one side, persecution tightened its grip. On the other, an unexpected possibility of redemption loomed, disguised as an enemy. And somewhere in the city, Karim lay in a cold cell, paying the price for a faith he would never compromise. Today, there are people like Karim, trapped in darkness simply for believing. If this reality touches you, please share this message. The storm wasn't just coming, it was already here. Living underground has its own rhythm, a silent language you learn to decipher. A car parked too long on the corner, a glance that lingers a little too long, the awkward silence as you enter the neighborhood store. Everything becomes a signal. Paranoia, more than a fear, becomes a survival tool. After Karim's arrest, we became shadows in the city. Every week we changed location. Monday on an abandoned rooftop, Thursday in the basement of a building under construction, Sunday in a barn far away, where the dry air mingled with our whispered prayers. Never at the same time, never more than 10 people together. We created codes, Pigeons flying south meant cancellation. Tea ready, it was safe to arrive. We deleted messages immediately after reading them. We used disposable cell phones, just once. Yet, amidst the chaos, something unexpected blossomed. We grew. The miracle of Blida, as they came to call it, went beyond our neighborhood. Young people from other places began seeking us out, not for the doctrine, but for the testimony. They wanted to see firsthand the community that resisted the attack, that saw the impossible happen. Nassim became part of this movement. After much prayer and debate, we decided to let him attend a meeting, a kind of silent trial. The meeting took place in an empty warehouse near the harbor, where the roar of the waves drowned out our voices. When he arrived, accompanied by Just and me, the group was visibly tense. Amira didn't come. She texted the night before. "I still can't. Forgive me." There was nothing to forgive. Nassim sat on the floor, leaning against the cold wall, hands on her knees. She didn't try to explain herself, just listened, as Joseph read from the Gospel of John. "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." When the reading ended, Fatima did something unexpected. She struggled to her feet, walked over to Nassim, and placed her wrinkled hand on his head. "Welcome," he said calmly. "There are no enemies here, only seekers." Nassim collapsed. He wept, his forehead resting on his knees, his shoulders shaking. No one touched him except Fatima, whose hand remained steady, a silent blessing, full of grace. That was the first time they actually. He attended 3 more meetings in the following weeks. At each meeting, he spoke a little more, asked questions, gradually revealing the wounded boy behind the mask of radicalism he'd worn for years. But not all were good days. Karim was still in prison. Our lawyer, a Christian from Algiers who specializes in religious freedom cases, warned us that the process would be long. "They're making an example of," he explained in one of the few visits they allowed. "They want to show the price you pay for being an active Christian." I visited Karim twice. The second time, I barely recognized him. He was thin, with a yellowish bruise under his left eye and a slight limp. I asked, my voice breaking, "What did they do to you?" He smiled weakly. "Nothing I can't fix." And urgently, he begged me, "Don't let this stop you. Promise me." I promised. Life outside prison wasn't easy either. I lost my job at the electronics store when the owner discovered my faith. Samir was forced to move to his uncle's house in another city due to family pressure. 3 young men from the group disappeared without a trace. We never knew whether it was out of fear or direct threats. But amidst so much difficulty, there were gestures of grace that surprised us. One afternoon, an elderly woman we had never seen before appeared at the door of the meeting. She brought fresh bread and, "It's from someone who believes in what you," she said, not wanting to reveal who it was. She simply smiled and left. God provides in mysterious ways. The other day, Nassim brought a friend, Tarek, who had heard about our. "I don't know if I believe in all this," he said, "but I need to understand what kind of faith it is that makes people risk so much." The community grew and strengthened. When someone lost their job, others shared what they had. When someone was threatened, we prayed together and sought solution. Fatima opened her home not only for meetings, but also as a shelter for those without a place to stay. A month after Karim's arrest, Nassim made a decision. It was during a particularly difficult meeting, when we studied the parable of the prodigal son. After everyone left, he stood and looked at me firmly. "I want to officially surrender my life to Jesus." I asked if he understood what that meant, that his family, his friends, everything he knew could turn against him. He replied, his voice firm, "I've already lost everything. When I tried to burn down that house, I lost my innocence. When I heard that voice in the hospital, I lost my certainties. Now all that's left for me to do is choose what to build on the ruins." 2 weeks later, at dawn, I baptized Nassim at a riverbank 2 hours from here. It was just the 4 of us. Yusuf, Fatima, Nassim. The water was freezing, but when he emerged, his face shone with a light I'd never seen before. "Peace. You are my brother now," I said, hugging him. "And that means we will go on together." Life in the shadows became our daily lives. But the shadows weren't just darkness. They were the place where the light entered and became even more intense. Karim remained trapped. Some had moved away. The future was uncertain, but something impossible to deny had happened. Faith resisted. We resisted. The community wasn't destroyed by persecution. It was shaped and strengthened by it. 5 years have passed since that July afternoon when 3 young men burst into Fatima's home with hatred in their eyes and fire in their hands. 5 years since an inexplicable shock knocked them to the ground and changed the fate of more lives than we could ever imagine. Today, I remain in Blida. From the outside, the city looks the same. Dusty streets, noisy markets, suspicious glances when someone asks about the small Christian community that meets discreetly. But inside, everything has changed. Our faith has matured. Our hope has taken root. The community has grown, Now there are about 40 of them. We can no longer fit into a single house, so we've split into 3 groups, spread across different parts of the city. We rotate leadership every month to protect each other and ensure no one becomes an obvious target. We remain cautious, yes, but fear no longer dictates our steps. We've learned that faith doesn't remove danger. It only gives us greater reasons than fear to carry on. Kareem was released after 14 months. He emerged thinner, with gray hairs appearing at his temples, with the same sparkle in his eyes, that fire that never goes. On the night of his release, we climbed to the rooftop of a building and stayed there until dawn. We cried, sang, and prayed. He didn't share many details about his time in prison. He simply said, "In the deepest darkness, I learned that the light doesn't come from outside. It's already within us. We just need to stop hiding it." Fatima is still with us. Her knees no longer support her well, but her presence remains firm. We gather again in her home, now more peaceful, unguarded. She sits in her old wicker chair, serving mint tea and blessing everyone who arrives with that mischievous smile. She has become our spiritual grandmother, the heart that holds everything together. When someone new arrives, nervous or afraid, she simply says, "Here you are safe. Here, you are family." Amira also found It took 2 years. 2 long years of nightmares, interrupted prayers, and panic attacks whenever she found herself behind closed doors. But with time, love, and prayer, she rose again. Today she leads one of the 3 groups. And a few months ago, in a meeting where no one could hold back tears, she looked at Nassim and said, "I forgive you. Not because what you did was right, but because carrying the hate was killing me inside." They hugged and cried together, and somehow, something felt complete in that moment. Nassim, the boy who once came to burn our tracts, is now my co-leader. He teaches the scriptures every week with a passion born of sincere repentance. His journey has not been easy. There have been setbacks, doubts, late nights when he would call me crying, saying, "I don't know if I deserve to be," and I always replied, "None of us do. That's why it's called grace." His family rejected him. His father kicked him out of the house. His brothers pretend he doesn't exist. His mother, when she sees him on the street, cries and tells him he's lost. Yet, he carries on. He carries on because he knows, and we all know, that while the world sees loss, God is writing victory between the lines. He works during the day in a mechanic's shop and dedicates his nights to Bible study. His teaching style speaks directly to the hearts of young people from radical backgrounds, because he's been there, knows the language, understands the doubts, and knows well the void many try to fill with anger. The other 2 young men involved in that incident took different paths. Farid, the strong one with the gold tooth, still holds a grudge for what happened. I see him occasionally at the market, always looking away. I heard he moved to another city and became even more radical after that episode. I pray for him every week, even though I don't know if he'll ever see what Nassim saw. Kamal, the boy with the scar, simply disappeared. Some say he went to Tunis, others that he died in an accident. Nassim tried to find him several times but never succeeded. He himself once told me, "Not everyone receives revelation at the same time. Perhaps Kamal needs another path, or perhaps his time has not yet come." He was right. God's sovereignty is always greater and more mysterious than we can understand. Earlier today, at our weekly meeting, something happened that made me want to write all this down. We were quietly singing an old hymn about God's faithfulness. Nassim stood beside me, hands raised, eyes closed, as the early morning light streamed through the window and illuminated her face. In that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. The invisible scar where hatred had once been, now glowed with something different, something I can only call redemption. I thought about that July afternoon, the burning pamphlets, the fear we felt, that shock no one could explain, and I finally understood something that had taken 5 years to sink in. Not every miracle is a visible healing or a spectacular rescue. Some miracles come mixed with warning and mercy. They are electric shocks that paralyze but do not destroy. They are seeds that germinate slowly in soil that seemed dry and infertile. The real miracle was not that 3 young men fell, but that one of them rose up transformed. Blida is still dangerous for us. We continue to be watched. We lose jobs, we face family rejection, and we live with the uncertainty that any meeting could be our last. Persecution hasn't disappeared, it has changed form. But we've learned something essential. The light of Christ isn't extinguished by threats, arrests, shocks, or burned pamphlets. This light isn't on paper or in human hands. It lives within us, and as long as we breathe, it will continue to shine. A month ago, Nassim baptized his first convert, a 16-year-old boy from a family as radical as his own. When he lowered him into the water, Nassim trembled. When he lifted him up, they both cried. Everyone there understood that we were witnessing a cycle closing, a story perpetuating itself. The aggressor has become the protector. He who came with fire to destroy now brings the fire of faith to illuminate and build. Today, as I look at this small but resilient community, I see faces marked by stories of struggle and courage. I see Karim, with the invisible scars that prison left on his soul. I see Amira, who regained her strength despite her fear. I see Fatima, with her hands weary from arthritis, but which continue to bless us all. I see Jusef, Samir, and so many others who chose to stand firm when giving up would have been the easier option. And I see Nassim by my side, teaching about a God who pursues his enemies not to destroy them, but to transform them. If you've ever felt like your faith exacts a heavy price, I want you to know, you are not. There are thousands of people like in Algeria, Iran, North Korea, in places whose names you may never have heard, gathering in secret, whispering prayers, facing struggles the world can't even imagine. But we remain here because we've found something worth so much more than safety, acceptance, or comfort. We found someone who found us first. If this story touched your heart, please pray for the Rashids and Nassims scattered around the world. Pray for the Fatimas who opened their homes despite knowing the risk. Pray for the Karims who are now imprisoned simply for believing out loud. And if you want these voices to reach further, share this testimony. Because every time someone hears our story, we receive an invisible force that tells us, you are not alone. The world sees you. God sees you. Subscribe if you want to walk with us. So these voices can reach more people, because this isn't just a story. It's a cry of hope from the shadows. It's proof that even when they burn our Bibles, they can't destroy the word that already lives within. Persecution doesn't extinguish faith. It purifies it. And the fire they tried to use to destroy us ended up becoming the light that guides us home. Every time I see Nassim raise her hands in worship, I remember that July afternoon and think, God writes stories no human screenwriter would dare imagine. And here we are, 5 years later, still standing, still believing.